I knew I was still alive because this morning I ached to be touched, not just in the way skin meets skin, but in that soul-deep, oxygen-gasping kind of touch, the kind that says, I see you. It had been 15 years since anyone touched me that way. 15 years since Jack passed and Luke left for the city. 15 years of brushing my own shoulder when I woke up, pretending it meant the same. The house had long grown quiet, too quiet. At first, I fought it. I'd turn on the radio, stack books by the bed, fold laundry, even when it wasn't needed. But silence has a way of sneaking in, not with loud knocks, but with whispers that sound a lot like your own breath. 64. That number clung to me like a second skin, not quite invisible, but rarely seen. Strangers at the market smiled at my hair, never at my eyes. Men held the door, but never held me. I wasn't bitter. I'd tell myself that often. I was lucky, healthy, safe, but I wasn't touched, not in the way that fills the hollow parts of you then. On a Tuesday that smelled like sea salt and dry leaves, Luke came home unannounced. He hadn't done that in years. Mom, he called, already inside, already hugging me before I could react. His arms were warm, firm, familiar. I held on too long. My heart tried to memorize the shape of him again. But behind him, there was someone else. This is Tyler, Luke said, stepping aside. He's just moved here, needs a place to stay. Figured your extra room might come in handy. And there he was, tall, soft-spoken, hair like wind had claimed it. A presence that felt young, not just in age, but in energy. He extended his hand. Thank you, Mrs. Carter, really appreciate it. The way he said my name, it was nothing, and everything a flutter, a spark. A quiet reminder that something inside me hadn't died, just gone dormant, waiting for the right wind to stir it. I told myself it was kindness, a room for rent, an act of hospitality. But that night, as I heard him moving upstairs, his footsteps pressing into the silence I had lived with for years, my body remembered something I had long asked it to forget. I knew I was still alive, because this morning I ached to be touched, not just in the way skin meets skin, but in that soul-deep, oxygen-gasping kind of touch, the kind that says, I see you. It had been 15 years, 15 years since Jack died. 15 years since Luke packed his bags and left for Portland, chasing ambition and city lights. And 15 years of quiet, not peace quiet. A hush that settled like dust on everything I used to be. I tried to outwit the silence. I'd leave the TV on, let classical music spill into the hallway, open the kitchen window just to hear birds. But silence always returned, not loud, not angry, just steady, like a tide that never needed permission to rise. My house was clean, organized, predictable. The same tea every morning, the same chair, the same path along the cliff behind the garden, with the same cracked bench where I sat, staring at the ocean, trying to remember what it felt like to be seen. 64. That number meant nothing and everything. I didn't feel old, really. But mirrors had started answering questions I hadn't asked, lines where there used to be glow, softness where there used to be lift. Still, beneath it all, I felt unfinished. Then, that Tuesday, the front door creaked open. I was folding laundry in the den, the sun casting warm stripes across the carpet. I thought I was imagining it. Mom, Luke's voice, familiar, unexpected. I nearly dropped the towel. He hadn't visited in months. By the time I reached the hallway, he was already pulling me into his arms. I brought someone, he said, stepping back. And there, behind him, was a man I'd never seen before. This is Tyler, Luke added. He's new in town, just started at the solar firm near the highway. He hasn't found a place yet, and I thought, the spare room. Tyler stepped forward. He looked barely 30, tall, lean, with a quiet strength, his eyes soft, but alert, met mine without flinching. Thank you, Mrs. Carter. I really appreciate it. His hand was warm when it met mine, just a handshake, just polite. But something in me fluttered. I told them, of course. Of course the room was available. Of course I wouldn't mind. But later, after they had carried his bags upstairs, and Luke had driven off again, I stood by the kitchen window, staring at Tyler's reflection in the glass as he arranged his things. Something stirred, not desire exactly, not yet. It was recognition of the space between people, of the way we search, without saying it out loud, for warmth, for contact, for a reason to feel awake again. That night, I couldn't sleep. I listened to footsteps overhead, soft creaks on hardwood. I imagined his silhouette behind the door, a stranger under my roof. And yet, not a threat, not a burden, an echo of something I thought I had buried. The next morning, he was already in the kitchen, coffee brewing barefoot. He smiled when he saw me. Hope I didn't wake you, he said, motioning to the kettle. His voice had that morning rasp, gentle, rough at the edges. I shook my head. We stood there for a moment, surrounded by the hum of the fridge and the quiet aroma of coffee beans. The silence, for once, felt full. He handed me a mug, our fingers brushed. I sipped slowly. And for the first time in years, the tea didn't taste like routine. It tasted like possibility. Tyler moved in as if he'd always belonged there, no fuss, no noise, just a quiet presence, like a page turning in a book you forgot you were reading. He brought little with him, a duffel bag, a laptop, a jacket that looked too light for Oregon's moody weather. His room, once Luke's childhood sanctuary, had sat untouched for years. I had kept it tidy, as if hope could be dusted weekly. But the moment Tyler unpacked, set down a worn paperback, laid his toothbrush by the sink, the space shifted. It breathed again. I tried to stay out of his way. I told myself I was simply being polite, not hovering. But I noticed things. How he rolled his sleeves twice before pouring coffee. How he hummed when he cooked low, almost tuneless, but constant. The way he leaned against the kitchen counter, ankles crossed, like he was waiting for someone he wasn't sure would ever come. And I noticed the door. It was always slightly ajar, not flung open. Just not quite shut. When he showered, he left it cracked. A ribbon of steam would curl out into the hallway, carrying hints of cedar and something warmer. I never looked directly, but I passed by more slowly than needed, a towel in hand, a reason to linger. I told myself it meant nothing. Once, I caught sight of his reflection in the bathroom mirror through the gap. He was shaving, focused, the blade gliding across his jaw like he'd done it 1,000 times without thinking. I turned away quickly, my pulse stuttering in my throat. I began to crave mornings, not for the tea, not for the sunrise, but for the chance that I'd catch him barefoot in the kitchen again, his hair still damp, shirt clinging just enough to suggest more than it hid. I hated myself for noticing, but I noticed anyway. He was polite, always kind. He'd ask about the books I read, compliment my garden, fix the loose cabinet hinge without being asked. But every smile he gave me carried no weight, no consequence. Just air, still my body didn't care. It remembered things. Late at night, when the house went quiet again, I'd lie in bed listening to the wind against the windows and imagine things I hadn't dared to in years. The warmth of touch, the pull of breath, a nearness that didn't ask for apology. It wasn't just loneliness anymore. It was hunger, not just for flesh, but for attention, for meaning, for someone to look at me and not see age or politeness or usefulness, but me. One evening, I brought him a clean towel. It was routine by then. He always forgot. I walked up the stairs. The hallway was dim, lit only by the light spilling from his room. His door was open just enough. I didn't mean to look. I told myself that, but I paused. The room was quiet, except for the faint sound of his breath. Deeper than usual, the flicker of a screen lit the space in a soft blue glow. And Tyler was on his bed, his head tilted back slightly, his hand my breath caught. I should have turned away. But something inside me froze, not in fear, not in shame, in awe not of the act, but of the intimacy. The rawness, the way he looked when he thought no one saw him. Then his eyes opened. We locked eyes, just for a second that stretched like fabric pulled too tight. I gasped, clutching the towel, stepping back like the floor had dropped beneath me. "I'm sorry," I stammered. He sat up, yanking the sheet up with him, startled. His voice cracked slightly. "It's okay, just, can you close the door?" I nodded, my face burning. The towel slipped from my hands and landed in the hallway as I turned, nearly running to my room, shutting the door behind me like a slammed confession. I leaned against it, my heart hammering. How had I become this woman? What had I done? What was I still wanting? The next morning, the world hadn't ended. The birds still chirped outside. The kettle still hissed. My slippers were exactly where I'd left them. But I wasn't. I moved slower, careful with each step, like the floor might collapse beneath me. My hands shook slightly as I poured tea. The towel lay folded on the counter. Tyler had returned it clean. without a word. He didn't mention what happened. Neither did I, but the silence between us had changed. Not cold, not angry, just loaded like air before a storm. Thick with the weight of unspoken things, he still greeted me with a soft good morning. Still smiled, still asked if I needed anything from the store. But I saw it, the way his eyes lingered a second too long. The flicker of something unnameable when our hands brushed over the sugar jar. That evening, we sat on the porch, the sky bruised into dusk. He brought out a bottle of wine he'd bought that day, a Pinot from a nearby vineyard. I figured it's too quiet around here not to have wine, he said, laughing softly. I laughed too. It surprised me how natural it sounded. We sipped in silence for a while, the kind of silence that doesn't demand anything, just lets you breathe. I used to come here with my wife, I said suddenly. His head turned. I hadn't meant to say it. She passed away, he asked gently. I shook my head. No, my husband did, Jack, years ago. Luke was still in high school. He didn't speak, just listened. And somehow, that was the kindest thing. The wine warmed me, not just my body, but something beneath my ribs. You ever married? I asked, more to fill the space. He smiled, a little sad. No, almost once. Didn't work out. We both looked toward the trees, letting the quiet speak for us again. I felt the tug first, that strange, low hum beneath my skin, the sense that someone was seeing me not as a landlady or a favor to a friend, but as a woman. He reached for the bottle, refilling my glass, and his fingers brushed mine. This time, neither of us flinched. Later that night, I stood at the bathroom mirror, unpinning my hair. The house was still. I watched myself remove the last pin, watched the way my hair fell grayer now. Yes, but still soft, still mine. I tilted my chin, studied the lines around my eyes. They weren't deep, just honest, like little maps of every smile, every grief. And for the first time in years, I wondered what would he see if he looked at me now, not with politeness, not with obligation, but with hunger. I wrapped my robe tighter, my skin tingled, not from cold, from remembering that it could. It started happening more often. The door left slightly ajar, the soft hum of water behind it, steam curling out like breath, exhaled slowly into the hall. Each time, I told myself it meant nothing. And yet, my steps grew slower as I passed. My hand lingered on the towel longer. My breath caught for no good reason. Tyler never seemed concerned. He moved through the house with the comfort of someone who belonged, unaware, or perhaps not, that I was unraveling in the shadows of routine. One night, I stayed up later than usual. The rain tapped gently on the roof, and I read the same page of my novel 3 times without understanding a word. I heard the water running. I stood, unsure why. Took the towel, walked slowly down the hall. I paused outside the bathroom. The door was cracked, warm air drifting through. The light inside flickered like candlelight on water. The sound of the shower was steady, rhythmic, soothing, hypnotic. I raised my hand to knock. but I didn't. I stood there, caught between the life I had kept quiet and the desire I had dared to feel. My fingers curled slightly against the towel, the fabric warm from my palms, my heartbeat steady no longer. Then I heard it, a low sound, not quite a sigh, not quite a moan, something private, personal. I froze. Something inside me, a force not rational, not polite, urged me forward. I pushed the door open, just enough to see. The steam parted. He stood there, his back to me, water cascading over him, his shoulders defined and motionless. A statue carved from breath and warmth. I whispered, "Tyler." He turned, his eyes widened. "Evelyn." His voice was soft, but startled. I stepped in, my hand rose, hesitated, then landed gently on his chest. It wasn't about boldness. It was about gravity, like something old inside me had finally found its pull. His skin was warm, alive. So was I, but just as quickly. Everything fractured. "What are you doing?" he asked, stepping back. The water didn't stop, but everything else did. I blinked. I thought. I wasn't sure if his expression twisted into something I couldn't name, surprise, confusion, maybe something worse. He pulled a towel from the rack, wrapped it around himself. "Evelyn, this isn't right." The words landed like a door slamming shut in my chest. I swallowed. "I'm sorry. I misread things." His gaze softened slightly, but the distance between us had already grown too wide. "You're kind," he said, quiet. "But this isn't what I expected." I nodded, my hands trembling. The steam clung to my skin like shame. I stepped back, then turned, my bare feet silent against the tile. I closed the door behind me, and this time I didn't listen for footsteps. I listened for the sound of something inside me breaking, and finally did. The days after blurred. I avoided eye contact, kept my voice light, my hands busy, cleaned drawers that didn't need cleaning, reorganized the pantry, took longer walks. I told myself it would pass. Tyler didn't bring it up. He acted as if nothing had happened, which made it worse, because for me, everything had. But silence grew heavier than confrontation. And one evening, it cracked. We were both in the kitchen. The radio played some old jazz standard in the background. He was making pasta. I was pretending to read the newspaper. "Wine?" he asked, lifting a bottle. I nodded. He poured, sat down across from me. Neither of us spoke for a while. Then, softly, I said, "I'm sorry for the other night." He looked up, his eyes kind. "You don't need to apologize." "I do," I said, voice tight. I crossed a line. He leaned back, hands cradling his glass. "It's not that simple." Silence again. I looked down at my lap, unsure what to say. He exhaled, slow. "I didn't handle it well," I panicked. I met his eyes. "I didn't mean to make you uncomfortable," I said. "You didn't," he replied, then paused. "Not really." There was something fragile in his voice. He continued, "It's just, I wasn't expecting it, but I've thought about it, about you." I felt my breath catch. He smiled soft, unsure. "You're beautiful, Evelyn." I almost laughed, not out of mockery, but disbelief. I hadn't heard that word in a very long time, not meant for me. Say that to make me feel better. Not, he said, leaning closer. I mean it. The air shifted like something held its breath between us. I'm not young, I whispered. He shrugged gently. Neither am I in the ways that matter. I studied his face, the quiet behind his eyes, the ache I hadn't noticed before. You want this? I asked. I want connection, he said, warmth, honesty. He reached across the table, his fingers brushing mine. Let S not make it complicated, he said. Let S not pretend we don't both feel something. My hand stayed in his, and I nodded. That night, the rain came back, soft against the windows. We didn't rush. We let the moment unfold like a song neither of us had heard before, but somehow remembered the tune. The walls didn't creak. The lights didn't flicker. Time stretched, slow and deliberate, like the breath before a truth. What passed between us wasn't just touch. It was something deeper. A rediscovery of warmth, of vulnerability, of being seen. And when it was over, we lay in silence, our breath steady, his hand resting near mine. I didn't ask what it meant. He didn't offer. But for a few precious hours, I didn't feel old. I felt real. I felt alive. The next morning, sunlight crept in like it always did, soft, golden, indifferent. I woke alone, sheets still warm beside me, faintly scented with cedar, and something else that wasn't mine. For a moment, I didn't move. I lay there, letting my fingers trace the fabric, as if I could memorize the shape of what had happened just hours ago. A part of me wanted to freeze time right there, not out of romance, out of relief, of having felt something I hadn't dared to hope for again. Tyler's footsteps came and went, the sound of a zipper, water running. No knock, no words, just life, continuing. He'd said no promises, no pressure, and I'd agreed. But still, I found myself listening more closely now, hoping for signs, worrying about their absence. By noon, he was gone, not in a dramatic way, just out. His car was missing from the driveway, no note. But I hadn't expected one. I made lunch, but barely touched it, cleaned the kitchen twice. When he finally returned, it was almost dusk. He didn't say much, just a quiet, "Hey," as he passed through the doorway. No smile this time, no eye contact. Something had shifted. I told myself it was nothing, that maybe he was tired, maybe it was work. But that night, as I walked down the hall with laundry in my arms, I heard his voice, muffled through the thin walls, through the half-open door of his room, laughter, then words. "Yeah, I did finally." Pause. "You wouldn't believe it, man, my landlady, total cougar." Another laugh. She was practically begging for it. I froze. Air stopped moving. Pity lay, bro, that's all it was. The words didn't make sense at first. They just floated there, disconnected from reality. Then they landed, each syllable like a crack, in something I had just started to rebuild. I stepped back, heartbeat thudding in my ears. He laughed again. And that's when it broke. I dropped the laundry basket, socks scattering across the floor, and marched to his door. Without knocking, I pushed it open. He turned, phone still in hand, his face drained. Evelyn, I didn't let him finish. Get out, I said, voice low, but sharp as glass. Wait, it's not what, don't lie to me, I snapped, my hands trembling. I heard everything. He stood, phone forgotten. I didn't mean it like that, don't, I said again. Just don't. The room seemed smaller than ever, claustrophobic with shame. You think I'm some joke? My throat burned. Some story to brag about to your friends. His jaw tightened. I didn't mean to hurt you. But you did, I whispered. And that was the truth. I stepped back, chest rising and falling too quickly. Pack your things. He opened his mouth again, but I was already turning. Get out of my house, Tyler. I didn't slam the door behind me. I didn't need to. The silence that followed said more than I ever could. He left an hour later. I watched from the window as he loaded his car. Didn't wave, didn't look back. And I didn't cry. Not yet. I waited until the taillights disappeared. Only then did I let myself fall to the floor, alone again. But this time, humiliated, shattered, and deeply, achingly awake. The hours after Tyler left were strangely loud. Not in sound, but in feeling. Every corner of the house echoed. The hallway felt longer, the kitchen colder. Even the mug I held in my hands that morning seemed to weigh differently, as if it knew something had shifted. I didn't cry again. I cleaned furiously, stripped his sheets, emptied the trash, opened every window to let the air change. But no breeze could erase the ghost of laughter that still clung to the walls. The shame wasn't just in what he said. It was in what I believed. I had told myself I was smart, careful, grounded. But I wasn't immune. I was still a woman, still capable of wanting, still stupid enough to mistake attention for care. That afternoon, I found the wine glasses we'd used still in the sink. I held one for a long time. Then I dropped it. The shatter wasn't loud, but it was enough. Later, I found his hoodie behind the couch, gray, soft, worn at the cuffs. I held it to my chest, and for a moment, just stood there, frozen in the middle of my own living room, wrapped in something that wasn't mine anymore. Then I tossed it out the front door. The neighbors might have seen. I didn't care that night. I sat on the porch alone. No wine, no second chair waiting. The stars were faint, the ocean distant. And in all that stillness, I heard it, my own voice, soft, almost childlike. What were you thinking? Not as an accusation, as a question, because the truth was, I wasn't. I had felt lonely, wanted, hopeful. And maybe I wanted to believe that desire didn't have an expiration date, that someone could still look at me and see more than age, more than past, more than function. But Tyler had only confirmed the worst fear, that maybe no one did. I sat there for a long time. Let the cold sink in. Let it teach me something. And when I finally stood, I wasn't angry anymore, just emptied, cleared out, ready for something else, not someone. Something, the start of silence that belonged to me, not one I filled with false hope or borrowed bodies. A silence that healed one breath at a time. The house was mine again, fully, No shadows drifting past the hallway. No creaking floorboards at odd hours. No extra toothbrush beside the sink. The silence was real this time, whole, and I didn't try to chase it away. I folded the last of the laundry, sheets stripped from the guest bed, fresh ones laid down with hands that no longer shook. It wasn't rage anymore. It wasn't heartbreak. It was clarity. The kind that settles only after everything has been cracked open and emptied out. I found his coffee mug still sitting in the cabinet, the one he always reached for, the chipped edge barely noticeable unless you were looking. I held it for a moment, then set it aside, not in the trash, not on the shelf, just away. He hadn't left a note. But a few days later, while cleaning the bookshelf, I found something slipped between two old paperbacks. A folded piece of paper, my name on it, Evelyn. I hesitated, then opened it. Just a few lines, scrawled quickly, maybe written in the car before he left. I never meant to make you feel small. You reminded me of someone I didn't know I missed. I'm sorry, I didn't know how to stay. I stared at the words, and for once, I didn't try to make them mean more than they did. They weren't redemption. They weren't enough, but they were honest. And that mattered. I placed the note in the drawer where I kept old birthday cards and Luke's crayon drawings from when he was small. Then I went outside. The air was crisp. The sky washed in soft gray. I stepped into the garden, where weeds had begun to take over since winter. I knelt slowly, pulled the gloves on, and began clearing space, turning soil, preparing for something new. My knees ached, my back twinged. But I kept working, because it wasn't about distraction. It was about choosing to stay, to tend to what I had left to myself. That night, I lit a candle by the window. No ritual, no reason, just a small flame. Proof that I was still here, still capable of light. The quiet, this time, was different, not heavy, not hollow. It had edges now clear, defined. I could move inside it without feeling like I'd disappear. I started waking up earlier, not because I had to, but because I wanted to. There was something soothing in the sound of the kettle, the way sunlight slid through the kitchen blinds and lit up the counter like it had a purpose. I no longer waited for footsteps above me or the rustle of someone else's routine. I filled the days slowly, tended the garden, walked to the local library, and borrowed books I'd never considered before: memoirs, travel journals, poetry that didn't rhyme. I went to a yoga class at the community center, where everyone moved slow and laughed at their own stiffness. And at the cafe on 3rd Street, the barista with the pink nails started calling me by name. "Evelyn, you're glowing," she said one morning, handing me my tea. I didn't feel glowing, but I smiled anyway. Maybe she saw something I hadn't noticed yet. Maybe I was softening again, this time, not for someone else, but for myself. I walked home through the park that afternoon, wind tugging gently at my scarf. A young boy chased a paper airplane across the grass, his mother not far behind, laughing, her voice bright and unburdened. For a moment, I watched them, not with envy, with hope. When I reached the house, I put the groceries away, fed the cat from next door who kept showing up like he owned the place, then sat at the piano bench by the window. I hadn't touched the keys in years. Jack used to play, sometimes Luke too, when he was little. I pressed one note, then another. It wasn't a song yet, but it was sound, alive. Later, I made tea and lit another candle, just like before, this time, not for comfort, just for light. The house didn't feel empty. It felt open, not waiting to be filled, just ready. Spring arrived with the soft insistence of something that had waited patiently. The mornings were no longer gray. They came bright, with bird song and light pooling across the floorboards like a quiet invitation. The garden I had cleared weeks before began to show signs of life, tiny green shoots pushing through earth I once thought barren. I kept the windows open now. The house smelled like thyme and old wood, and something warmer I couldn't quite name. One afternoon, while I was pruning the rosemary, I heard laughter sharp and bright, like wind chimes caught in a sudden breeze. I looked up. A little girl from 2 houses down stood at the edge of the yard, watching me. "Can I pick a flower?" she asked. I nodded. She stepped onto the grass like it was sacred, picked the smallest daffodil, held it close. "What's your name?" I asked. "Leela," she smiled, missing a front tooth. I smiled back. "I'm Evelyn." She waved, then darted back toward the sidewalk, flower clutched in her hand like treasure. And just like that, something inside me softened further. That evening, I made soup from scratch, set one place at the table, not out of habit, not out of hope, just because I was hungry. Afterward, I cleaned the kitchen, folded the towel over the sink, and walked into the living room where the fire burned low. I sat on the couch, crossed my legs beneath me, took a breath. On the coffee table, beside a worn copy of The Secret Garden, was a note I had written weeks ago, but never sent, addressed to no one, not even myself. Just a few lines. "You are not past your prime. You are not invisible. You are still here." And that is enough. I read it once more, then left it there, not as a reminder, but as truth, the kind that doesn't ask to be believed all at once, just enough to begin again.